You got it. Okay. So we are recording today's session. And today we are focusing on an incredible panel of alumni who are working in STEM careers. I'm going to call it beyond the research lab. So primarily outside of academia. I'm not going to do deep introductions because each one of them is going to introduce you after we do a quick icebreaker activity. We are going to put, we're going to set up some breakout rooms. Blessing, are those set up or? Nope, nope. Oh, she's working on those. You all set? Yep, okay. So fantastic. We're going to do a breakout room. And in that breakout room, you're just going to introduce yourself, the program that you're in, and the type of job you're looking for. And then I'd invite you to share a little bit about any concerns that you have regarding your own job search. And we've asked the panelists to go last. The breakout rooms will be short. And then when we come back, we're going to move into the presentation by our panelists with the moderated panel. And then there'll be plenty of room for all of you to ask questions. So let me go ahead and start the breakout rooms. Oh, Blessing has done that. Fantastic. There we go. Little breakout rooms to make it a little bit more personal so you could get a chance to meet some other folks. So today's panel is focused on STEM careers beyond the research lab. And we are so fortunate to have 4 incredible panelists with us. I'd like to start by asking each of you to introduce yourselves. And if you might talk a little bit about the work that you currently do and how you got there. And why don't we start with Alessandra and then go on to Addie and Kaylin and Dustin, if you could go after Kaylin, that would be awesome.
Sure. So I am a kind of policy analyst, kind of researcher. My real title is analyst and writer at AAAS, the premier science professional society in the US. And really what I do is I analyze the federal budget for science spending. So I am in charge of tracking where every single federal dollar that is invested in science research goes, and generating data sets on that. And then once that's done, we would advise Congress, we advise OSTP, which is the Office of Science, Technology and Science for the President. We advise foreign diplomats on what the US is doing with their science money. So basically, I take what Congress puts out, remove everything that is not science, and then show it back to them being like, here's what you did. Because they're so rushed that frequently they don't really know what they did science-wise. Afterwards, they're like, oh, okay, cool, that's nice. So that's what I do day to day. Should I expand beyond that?
Could you just say a little bit about how you got there? And then
Sure.
our next question, we'll dig deeper into the things each of you is doing.
Okay, so I got there because during the course of my PhD, I realized that I didn't really want to generate data. I struggled a lot with like experimental failure and all of that. So I kind of got disillusioned with wet lab science. So I started shifting towards, I still like science and I still like research. Where can I do science where a data set already exists for me? I don't need to make it anymore. And that's how I kind of transitioned into social sciences and science policy. because you get these like huge data sets full of numbers and characteristics, and then you make something out of them instead of going the other way, where you have to make that data set and then figure out what it meant.
And then I apologize. Could you just say a little bit about which program you were in and when you graduated? Thanks.
So I was in biochemistry, which is a subset of chemistry and biochemistry. And I graduated in 2019.
Before the world changed. Thank you so much. Okay, pass the mic.
I believe it was Addie next, right?
Yep.
Sorry, I got it wrong. Okay, so I'm a research analyst for the Center for Naval Analyses, which is a federally funded research and development center located in Arlington. Does a lot of work for the Navy, but there's a side called the Institute for Public Research that does a lot of like policing reform, social justice, humanitarian, water, stuff like that, like all over the spectrum. But my side is mostly focused on the Navy, and we, like 90% of my coworkers are PhDs. They have some degree in physical sciences, or I mean, there's a couple of astronomers. There's I think maybe there's one person that did stuff on quantum dots, so maybe it's materials related. We generally solve open-ended questions that the Navy has concerns about. They have to be open-ended as part of our work, because if they are not, if they're readily apparent, that's not part of our contract with the government. Our contract with the government is like, you need to be able to solve problems that other people don't have easy solutions for, which is kind of an interesting aspect of the work, but it also makes it difficult. And that's kind of why they want PhDs doing it, because you need to be sort of like a self-starter and throw yourself into things that you have no expertise in, which is basically what I've ended up in. I'm specifically on the cyber IT and networks team, and I've been doing a lot of work in naval communications. So networks and stuff like that, which I had no expertise in before, but I've really enjoyed learning about. You said to talk about how we got there.
Yeah,
So,
how'd you get there?
I did a lot of Susan Martin's workshops. No, it was great. I think I was like a third year when one of them was happening, and everyone that else was in it was a fifth year PhD student. And I remember being like, wow, I'm here way too early. But then I think you specifically said like, no, you're here at the right time. And everyone else at my table was like, yeah, I think you should have, I wish I had started earlier, because you know, by the time you get to the end of the line and you're like, I need to leave, it's good to have already figured out your exit strategy. And so I think the fact that all of you are here and doing this is good. I don't think it's too early to think about what the next step is. And in terms of what I actually did to get my job, I went to an online career fair and someone recruited me. They said just apply, but I talked to them a lot. I talked to a lot of people at the company, and really like I did interviews with them outside of my interview to figure out what it was actually like, because I was very concerned with the job culture and workplace, work-life balance and stuff like that. So I wanted to make sure that I was getting myself into something that I knew was going to be okay.
That's super. That's
Yeah.
super.
And I graduated in 2021. So they had already figured out the pandemic by then, but yes, it was still not great. It's fine. I think it's good.
Thank you. That's super. Thanks for the plug.
So I think I'm next. Kaylin Cage, I finished up, I defended in 2017. That's when I got my job offer, but I hung around the university for about 6 months, publishing and taking a break before I started actually working, which made my boss a little mad, but, yeah, I don't recommend that, but I do recommend a break before you actually start working, because I mean, I needed that for what I ended up stepping myself into. So I work at Amazon Lab 126, which is like the manufacturing portion of Amazon. So they started with the e-reader. And pretty much every device that you'll see that has like an Alexa, Fire TV, all of that, we do the devices. And so it's I would say it's like one of the fastest hardware developing firms. And what I do specifically is I work in new product integration, which we call MPI. And I'm a research, I do a lot of research because it's new technologies that we want to investigate. And so my boss thought it was a good fit to have another PhD, because he was a PhD, do that portion. And so I get to investigate, like, how do you incorporate technology like lasers and other things that I just won't go into detail because I don't know if I'll get in trouble for, but any new technologies into the products that we create, and what does that mean, and how do you maintain safety and customer safety, as well as like making sure that it effectively works from a compliance standpoint, or it meets our specifications. And if there are no specifications, we try to define them, because we believe in making sure that our products are safe first. And so, yeah, that's a core aspect of what I do. The other part is general safety compliance for, I've worked on Echo shows, tablets, and e-readers so far. So I've done pretty much the Echo family and a few tablets.
And Kaylin, how did you land there?
So interesting. I had a lot of conversations, I think, with Susan as well. But I also like attended I was like always at the graduate research week. I know it was like a conference week. So I always attended those, and anything that I could find to help me, because I knew, like, I was a part of Startup Shell. So I was like, ideally I was gonna leave and maybe had a patent that turned into a startup, and then I would go right and do my startup after graduation, but that didn't work. And so I was presenting at a conference, some research that I had done at Los Alamos National Lab for a grant that I had gotten to write and kind of explore my own research angle for Los Alamos. And then presenting that research, I guess I stepped into the tech stratosphere. And so that conference was Grace Hopper conference. And from that point, I think every tech company they just like attacked, and you were just like, I don't even know what you're looking for. And they didn't know how to ask PhDs questions. And they were just kind of like, we just need somebody smart that can just answer all these questions and go really, really fast. And so we work on an agile methodology, which are just like sprints. So there's cycles where you work all the time, and then there's cycles where it's not much work, but it just depends on the pace of the industry and what we're trying to get out.
Yeah, Grace Hopper Conference for Women in Computing is really an incredible networking opportunity. It's one of the largest conferences of women in computing, I think, in the nation. Yeah, great. And Dustin, how about you? What are you doing these days, and how did you get there?
Hi, everyone. I'm Dustin. I am a data scientist, and I don't work for the NIMH, National Institute of Mental Health. I'm a contractor for that. I work in the NIMH, and I'm legally not allowed to say that I work for NIMH. It's complicated. If you want to talk about the difference between a contractor and a federal employee, we can totally do that. But I am a data scientist, and I work for the data science and sharing team for NIMH. And we are a service team that serves all of the intramural research labs at NIMH. So if you're not familiar, NIMH has intramural and extramural. Extramural are people who are getting grants from a university. Intramural are labs who are housed inside NIH. And I serve all of the intramural labs in many different ways, including helping the researchers interface with the high performance computing cluster. As I'm sure a lot of you know, people who are trained to research aren't necessarily trained to code, aren't trained to use supercomputers. And so I help the researchers think of, or they come up with the questions, and I help them find big data sets and then use the supercomputers to run their pipelines through, or I develop pipelines for them. I also do work that not many people want to do, like what are best practices in file management systems and archiving data. I teach people how to do best practices in open science, and it could be like running workshops for a lab on how to use GitHub. And then another thing that we do is that we pinpoint high impact studies for replication. Like say a study, a high impact study has gotten a lot of attention using one open source data set. We will find another larger data set and try to run that exact same study again, which is something that a lot of people don't have the time, and there's not a lot of money to do. And so we think it's important. And I got there by, I graduated in 2019 from the Neuroscience and Cognitive Science program, NEX, and my home department was in psychology, and I studied child development, specifically how kids grow up to think about other people and what changes in their brain as a function of their social abilities. And so I scanned a lot of kids in the MRI and looked at their brains and came up with a whole lot of null findings for my dissertation. But yeah, it was fun, and it got me to where I am.
Dustin, could you say just a tiny bit about how you learned that you could work as a contractor? Because I think a lot of times our doc students and postdocs don't think about that. But here in the DC region, with so many federal agencies, contract positions are a real viable option for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, definitely. And I have friends who work for other contracting companies like Booz Allen, and they're really happy for them. I learned about my position because my supervisor was friends with the team lead. And when I told her that I wasn't interested in doing a postdoc, I asked her to flex her network, and she reached out to her friend at NIMH, who then contacted me. And I didn't know the distinction between a federal employee or a contract. I just knew that I wanted to work on his team, and he had a contractor position open. So I didn't go like to the contracting company and look at job listings from them. It was kind of a backdoor way in or something.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's so interesting to hear how each of you have pivoted in some ways and fine-tuned what you love doing. And I think a lot of times doc students are thinking very linearly, like, how am I going to find the position where my dissertation research is going to plug in? And your stories are really telling a different story, quite honestly. Could each of you take us a little deeper into what the day-to-day looks like, and maybe how your doctoral training either prepared you or not so much for what you're doing? So if you could make that connection between what you do day to day and maybe what you were trained up to do in grad school or in other experiences that you've had.
Am I starting again?
I was going to say, go ahead. We can go in that. You can jump in as you feel ready.
Okay. Well, I was going to echo Dustin's point. My PhD thesis resulted in nothing publishable. So that doesn't mean that it's the end of the line. I got the degree and now I'm doing something completely different. But so my day-to-day varies because it depends on Congress. So sometimes I'm coming up with stuff to do because Congress took 8 months to finalize the omnibus. Sometimes they finalize the budget and then 2 weeks later, the president releases next year's budget. So I'm just like very busy for a full month. So it's kind of varied. And that's one of the things with being in science policy. You'll get just like moments of frantic activity as like a bill drops, or like in June, I'm expected to be incredibly busy because that's when appropriations hits the committees. so like you kind of just have to be okay with your work-life balance being on average good, but not day-to-day good. So like right now we're waiting for appropriations to hit committees. So I'm doing a lot of like international competitiveness reports. I'm doing work following up on like topics that we've had requests for. So, but it's a lot of data entry. It's a lot of contacting governments and agencies for reports and internal files. It's a lot of learning to manipulate Tableau, which is something I'd used Tableau interfaces before, but I had never built one. So that was something that I had to learn. And then that's pretty much my day-to-day. I forgot what the second half of the question was.
How did your training at Maryland, your graduate training, prepare you for this?
So the ability to think fast, that's probably the biggest one. Because when you're in the lab, you see a result and you're like, okay, what are the like 3-4 options? What could this mean? What do I do next, etc. Given this like kind of accordion style timing, you sometimes have to think very, very fast and be reasonably sure you're correct. You don't have to be correct. You need stuff out the door. And other times you can kind of relax, deep dive, be more meticulous. So that's really, I think, the most important thing the PhD gave me. The ability to like think really fast without panicking.
Who's going to go next? That's great. It has nothing to do then with all these technicalities. It's more about the way you think. What a great answer. Yeah.
I can go next. So for me, it's very not like that. It's like a 9 to 5, which is what I wanted. I really like I think Dustin mentioned it in our intros, but the ability to do things that I want to do outside of work. I mean, I like to run, I like to play sports, I like to play video games, I like to, right now, be outside as much as possible. And there's not always time for that if you're suddenly swamped with work until 8 p.m. So I was looking for that, and that's what I got, which I really like. In terms of what I actually do, it's a lot of research, like actually looking up stuff and learning about stuff. There is some programming involved, but not for everybody. It depends on what kind of study you're on. And I don't think anybody, I think for me, it's just a plus that I can do it. Other people have learned on the job. Talking to people, writing and presenting, which is basically what I did as a grad student. So it's a natural fit, but like the subjects are totally different. So in grad school, I studied battery materials, and I did on the theoretical side. So I did computation to basically determine which battery materials would be safer or more energy dense. And now I'm in a completely different area, and it's all about the DoD. I mean, the DoD is a big employer. So if you talk to people in the DC area, there's likely going to be an agency that they're employed with or by, and one of those agencies is DoD. So learning all the DoD lingo and the Department of Defense, and becoming acquainted with the problems that they have that they care about. And I think for me, the biggest thing that Maryland or being a PhD student helped me with is within my current job is like self-management. So because a lot of our projects are not necessarily scripted, like you have this task to do, and then you have to do this task, and then you have to do this task. It's a lot more like, well, how do we get there? And like, what path should we take that's the most efficient, or learning about it and then figuring out the approach. So I think being okay with not knowing the answer right away and sort of self-managing that. I think I had to do a lot of that as a grad student as well, and just figure out where the project was going and stuff like that. I mean, I also ended up with a lot of like results from my PhD, but I just didn't like the feeling of academia, and I didn't want to go do a postdoc and then in 3 years have to go get a job for real. I mean, so that's kind of why I went directly to industry as well. But yeah, I would say all the writing skills, all of the programming skills, that was like a huge plus. But I think if I hadn't really learned how to approach open-ended problems, then I would be worse off than I am now. Yeah.
This is so interesting. Wow. Who's going to go next?
I can jump in. I'll keep the same order. So I think so I guess from Maryland, I think the biggest skill that I kind of use now is the ambiguity of just basically having a research question, and then you get to a point where there's not any more support to help you solve that, and you kind of have to figure it out. That's pretty much a daily basis what we do in the product development process, because you're going to run into issues where something fails on the line, and we got 10 hours to fix it. I mean, we need to come up with the solution and the next step, and we can't stop manufacturing because it's huge. And so, like, I guess what I currently do, I think in more detail on a day-to-day is I kind of manage, you still, even though like a lot of jobs in tech, I think are still heavy on the program management, which I don't particularly enjoy, but you have these programs and you go technically deep. And so like a lot of I do a lot of research up front. So like maybe one phase of my project, this is like very early in the PDP. I'm doing all research every day just to come up with a plan. And then at this point, like I have 3 projects that are pretty much at the end of the line. And so now I'm just kind of managing if anything comes up, if a test fails, if I'm thinking of the solutions for it. So it's more like you do have to think fast, but it's like I used to go into my lab and test, but with the pandemic and working from home, I don't always have it, but I do have devices on hand. So I might like take a device apart and like see if I could figure out, like if it's a software issue, see if I could figure out like the debugging code, because we have like a way that we code our devices when we're testing. And so I'll try to go through some of the test code. But if it's not software related and it's like a failure, that's what we don't like, but we got to retest and figure out like what could be the variances in the test setup or anything, because I work in compliance, we deal with certified test labs. And so some testing we do internally, but the majority of the testing has to be performed in a certified test lab setting. So we like most of some of our test labs are overseas. And so in those cases, we don't get to go and like do the performing of some of the tests. But for the basic tests, we still need to make sure that they know how to set up the test. So we have visibility, but it's really like managing the testing and what we're supposed to deliver at each phase of the PDP, and making sure that we don't experience failures. And if we do experience those, we have to kind of come up with those solutions really fast.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Dustin, how about you?
Yeah, so my day-to-day really depends on what labs at NIMH request of us. And so if that's our first priority, is somebody will come to our team and say, I need this, I want to do a study, we're interested in this type of thing, We want to look at how genetics interact with brain function and how that can predict depression or something. Let's find a data set for this. And so a lot of that is based on the need. And so if we have a lot of labs coming to us, then I'll be focused on doing whatever they need. And then when there's off time, then I'll do other things like developing file organization, standard operating procedures, and archiving data and cleaning things up. And I think that the thing that I did in grad school that best prepared me for this is talking to people of different fields. Going and talking to someone with a poster that I have no idea what they're doing and trying to get something out of it, trying to ask one semi-intelligent question to them. Because now people are coming to me from, I mean, it's National Institute of Mental Health. And so there is like some category. We study humans, we study, well, I guess there are animal labs there too. I primarily deal in human labs. But I need to be able to talk with people who have expertise that are not my own. I don't have a background in genetics, but I talk with a lot of people who study genetics. And so I need to be able to get some information from them, and I need to be able to convey some information to them. And so trying to find a common language. And so something I did in grad school a lot was I talked to everybody. I tried to be in as many interdisciplinary presentations and programs as possible, just so that I could develop a common vocabulary with everyone.
That's great. Blessing, have we had any questions come in through the chat? If not, we'll just open it up for questions right now.
We have not yet.
I want to encourage those who are in attendance to turn their cameras on and introduce yourself and ask a question to one or all or some of the panelists, as ever you want to do. I know there are questions out there. Here's a question that came in from Madeline. So Madeline wants to know, did you find it difficult to prepare for, oops, the chat box disappeared. Did you find it difficult to prepare for interviews if the positions were outside of your doctoral field of study? So how did you do that? Did any of you do that?
So policy has a very specific way of doing things, because no one has the time to adapt to different formats. So one of the big things there is I needed to have prior exposure to, first of all, know that there were specific ways of doing things, and then also have people help me adapt to them. So policy is not something you typically like stumble into. It's something that needs a little bit more prep. So I started when I was a graduate student, still joining science policy student groups, doing policy advocacy. And you just like slowly build. In the beginning, you're just kind of like, okay, I'm hanging out with people who have ideas. And then eventually you're like, okay, I'm on a project now. Didn't notice that happening. Actually, on next week, I'm releasing a like 60-page policy report that I did not for work on the side with one of those student groups. So it kind of just like you put your hand into like a bunch of different things, and you get used to the format of it. So by the time it hit interviews, I had never done that style, that particular like writing prompt type before. But I knew some of the words that were needed to be used. I knew who I could ask to revise it to make sure like it fit the parameters of the prompt. So I kind of like had enough background to get to the correct answer instead of just kind of writing what I was used to writing, which would probably not have gotten me a second interview.
That's great. Blessing, thanks so much for dropping those student orgs in the chat box. And the same is true for consulting. There's an excellent graduate consulting group here at Maryland. And there are quite a few engineers that are in that group currently. So Alessandra, your point is that you need to learn to speak the language and understand what the interviewing style is in another discipline, if I understood you correctly.
And also get a mentor in fields you're interested in, even if you're not 100% sure about them. Just kind of start getting people who could answer your questions should you move forward in those directions.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that question?
I want to echo what's already been said about the common language, because I also said that in my previous answer. But like the job that I interviewed for wasn't too far off of what I did in grad school. But it was far off enough to where if I said something like the development of children's default mode network relates to the social responsiveness scale or something, like if I started dropping a lot of jargon in there, like they're very smart people, but they don't understand the very specific field language. And so having the ability to convey what you do and what you've done in a way that doesn't get bogged down in the details, because you're going to lose people pretty quickly. And, you know, the people who are interviewing you are smart people, but you can't expect them to know all of the specific nitty-gritty measures that you are singularly focused on in your PhD. And so having a way to step up, not take a higher level view of how you explain of what you do.
Okay. I see Addie and Kaylin's heads nodding too. Did you, either of you want to add anything to that?
I mean, my job is not what I did in grad school at all. But my interview, they basically interviewed me by having me give essentially a thesis defense. So I gave like an hour-long seminar talk. And then I had some other one-on-one interviews with research program directors. They were, like Dustin said, they were okay with me talking about my research, but I think the reason why it was good that I already was able to communicate it in a way that other people could understand it was because that helped them see the significance of my work without needing to understand every single jargon, whatever metric point about those things that I was looking at. So yeah, exactly the same thing. And I think it's okay as long as you're prepared for what the interview will be like. Luckily, I had talked to people and they also had given me a heads up about what would be happening. So I just needed to prepare myself for communicating.
So Kaylin, when I'm thinking about your pivot to Amazon to a large tech company is probably a pretty large pivot. So do you have any advice to share about really pivoting to that space where the product and everything is being driven on the manufacturing floor is really, it's a totally different arena?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I had a lot of theory about, so a part of, it was kind of related to my work. So like in the interview, I kind of dug into like the parts that were related to the work that I I'd already done, because I learned about manufacturing theory as a part of like mechanical product design. And then you go into like, well, this is how we anticipated working. So if I see like, you know, I mean, they ask you a lot of like basic mechanical engineering questions, stress, strain, different things. I won't go into the interviewing process, but like you go through and you problem solve during the interview. And so that was kind of like in alignment with what I had studied, especially for like a product design engineer, which is what I was interviewed for at lab. They ended up putting me into a role that kind of went into more of my reliability coursework, which was like, it was cool because I had no idea that like one of our VPs of reliability or product integrity at lab actually graduated from it. So I found like, because who else knows about reliability outside of like Maryland? And so we actually have been in the industry for 20 years using the principles that we studied that Maryland kind of trailblazed in. And so that stuff it made it more familiar. I think when I pivoted to the job that I'm in now, which before I was like I was supposed to be like a product design TPM, which is a technical program manager, but what I did wasn't that. I kind of just did reliability research in labs and help people and did data analytics to help answer high level questions for our global safety organization. And that was more customer facing. And then this is now our actual PDP. I'm in an engineering, like a pure engineering role. And so, but I never did compliance, to be honest. Like I didn't have a background. I'd done an internship at the FDA or fellowship at the FDA, but that was like the extent of my policy or like standards experience. I kind of just talked, and I was really hardworking. And so I think if you just kind of can think, and I know how to read standards, I know how to do the testing. Testing makes sense. It's thermal. Like I get it. And so like for many of the things that are within the standards, I can actually test too, because I have that background experience. But it wasn't so far outside of my scope that I felt uncomfortable technically. So I felt like, but I do feel like it was way more applied than some of the theory, the theoretical science that you incorporate in your PhD. So it's just, it's very different. I like to be a little bit more challenged. So the new technology aspect of my job is where I really like get more, I'm the most comfortable in, because that's the part that I feel is technically challenging. But once I learn the technical details of the other job and you pick it up and you apply it, it's really like rinse and repeat kind of.
Thank you so much. That's awesome. Well, I want to be really cognizant of everyone's time, and perhaps we could just take 1 minute each and share a piece of advice, something that you wish you knew or that you learned along the way that really helped you with this transition from PhD to workplace. And I'll let you speak in the order that you feel so moved. I won't put anyone on the spot.
You're more qualified than you think. Because I didn't just like shift topic, I shifted school, because I went from the life sciences to the social sciences to policy. And like, while I didn't think I was fully qualified for every move. Like hiring decisions had no issues with my background. And that's not something like I thought was not going to be a hurdle. So you're more qualified for whatever you want to do than you think.
My advice has to do with not trying to learn every single thing in grad school in order to prepare yourself for all the possible skills you might need. So my example is I knew that I liked to code, and I tried really hard to learn a bit of every coding language and everything. And it really stressed me out. And ultimately, it didn't really matter too much as long as I knew how to do one well. And so my advice is to learn what you need for your projects and do it as best as you can, and then trust yourself that you can learn in the future. Like the PhD is a piece of paper saying that you know how to learn things really well. And so trust yourself that you can learn whatever is coming that you need, and that you can do what you need to do currently, do it well.
I'm trying to
Oh,
think.
sorry.
Okay, so I think, yes, I think it'd be good to be okay with letting go of your dissertation work. I had a lot of pride in what I did, and I knew that what I was going to do was not going to be exactly the same, but I didn't realize how totally different it would be. And I think that, I mean, maybe this is just me rationalizing, but I think it's okay. I think a lot of people, it's going to be very hard for them to expect to be exactly doing what they did in grad school. And as evidenced by everybody here, nobody did that. So yeah, it's okay. Even though you put a lot of work and time, probably more than 4 years into doing that stuff, it is a stepping stone to your next endeavor.
Yeah, I'll echo Abby. It was definitely hard for me to let go. I'm not sure that I've let go yet. I don't know. I might jump back into it one day. I don't know. I'm still like, it's very hard, but I think I think the biggest thing that I took away is like giving back. I wanted to make the process easier for my fellow grad students to just enter into tech. Like I felt like we got on-campus recruiters and we got opportunities for us to talk to tech professionals, but like I just didn't feel like tech respected the University of Maryland, like for what we gave, especially when I found out that all of our reliability department is based, like the same work is literally coming right from Maryland out to the West, and people do not know. And so I was just like, I'm gonna make sure that you guys know my alma mater. And I think that was like, I started like, as soon as I got to lab, I was like, no, my school's good. Hey, I got people that can do this, because I kept getting requests for referrals. And so, I was just like, okay, well, let's take it a little step deeper. And like the way that I guess they work is like, you have to actually engineers recruit. So because we interview for technical, I guess just for the technical interview. But if that's the case, we never came to Maryland. And so I just wanted to make sure that Amazon knew about Maryland. So that was kind of one thing. And I think I've been successful in that, in terms of like I was able to assist in starting the PhD fellowship at Lab 126. They sponsor for all you graduate students. If you're interested, and you're in the engineering college, we were able to get that funded for the next year. I'm just ecstatic about it, because we hired two engineers, and now they're scientists. And it's very hard to know where to go and as a PhD, but getting into a scientist role gives you mentorship, gives you access to still continue to do science. It's going to pivot your focus, but it gets you into the spaces. And so I'm just happy that we have that partnership, and that I could help with that.
Thank you. I think you are also pointing out the value of networking and knowing where our alumni are. I want to be really respectful. It looks like we are out of time. Blessing or anyone else last? I'm looking at Veronica. Blessing, did you want to say anything?
I just want to say thank you so much. It's been lovely to hear about your journeys and where you are now, and kind of what you would have done differently perhaps in grad school. I think a lot of us have these similar feelings. And so it's nice to hear from people who have gone into really great careers to say, like, it's going to be okay. You're gaining skills that you need, and you will end up okay. So thank you for that.
I also want to echo that. Thank you so much for your words of wisdom and your encouragement to other students. And, it's really helpful to me as I work with my PhDs to be able to kind of pass along your guidance.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, that wraps it up. I will stop the recording, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon. And on behalf of the grad school, our career centers on campus, and the whole university, thank you so much, alumni.